Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for attending tonight's Coastal Crossroads series. I'm thrilled that we have this collaboration, that lifelong learning here at Flagler College and the St. Augustine Historical Society collaborates for this wonderful speaker series. I'm Shelley Gazer. I'm the director of the Lifelong Learning Program. And I just really want to welcome everyone and thank you for coming. And we're in this beautiful historic Markland House. And I can't wait to hear about our speaker and all of the really fascinating pieces of the history he's going to share, Mark Vargas. And I will turn it over to Nicole, who will give a proper introduction for our speaker tonight.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nicole Deem. I'm the librarian and curator for the St. Augustine Historical Society. And I would like to introduce our speaker, Mark A. Vargas. He's the development director at America's Packard Museum and has a 35-year career in museums and libraries. He was chief operating officer at the Revs Institute in Naples and directed the libraries at St. Cloud State University, St. Xavier University, the University of Arts and Sciences at Oklahoma. Before that, Mark was an archivist at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He received an MA in History and MLS in Library Science from the University of Maryland, and he has published over 20 peer-reviewed articles, made numerous professional and public presentations, and served on local, regional, national, and international boards and committees. He's also a fan of the Chicago Cubs, Sherlock Holmes stories, and Packard convertibles. Everyone, please welcome Mr. Mark Vargas.
Thank you, Nicole and Shelley. We're going to start off with a brief video. I'll talk more about this after we see it. We were going to have it running about 12 minutes ago. And obviously we had some technical glitches. So we're only going to show about 3 to 4 minutes of this video, but you'll get the idea. And the number one thing I want you to look at is how many cars do you see in this video? This is from San Francisco, April 14th, 1906. Some of you may recognize the date. So we're going to show this video and we're going to run for just a few minutes and then we'll continue on. There we go. So a special welcome to our Zoom audience, by the way. Didn't have a chance, and thank you all for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it. I drove up from Naples yesterday, going to Orlando hell. To get here, we had a wonderful day here in town. And again, thank you for coming. I guess I should use the mic. We all are familiar with cars and the things that we love and hate about cars. Some of us are car guys, the red, stick shift high. Some of us are not. Some of us hate cars. But we could all go on for hours about what we like and dislike about automobiles, from their cost to the traffic. Does that look familiar? I saw that today. And so make sure this is working. There we go. And I just did a Google map, a shot of the city a couple days ago, and we would all recognize the red. Well, the fun part about the automobile is that there's nothing new under the sun. The exact same issues that we love and hate about the automobile were true for horses 100 years ago. And that's what I'm going to talk about tonight, and how that world changed from the era of the horse to the horseless carriage. And it was a little more complex than you might think. A lot of folks think, oh, the automobile, and that took care of the horses. It was a little more complex than that. But the issues are basically the same. Change the nouns and you'll get the idea. So the horse era was just like today. You loved them, you hated them. Did they make noise? You bet. One of the biggest complaints about horses was the noise they made, the racket, driving people crazy, clomping down the streets. The traffic. We're going to talk a lot about pollution. And so this is all very familiar to us. Oh, I meant to mention, by the way, that clip we saw at the beginning is from April 14th, 1906 in San Francisco. Of course, 4 days later was the Great San Francisco earthquake. There are many, 3,000 were killed. That street, that's Market Street, you can go down it today, but it's completely destroyed, and they show pictures of it at the end. There are many versions of that video. It's in the public domain. I chose one that had some sound to it, just for the audience here, but there's colorized versions. But if you want to see the original, it's at the Library of Congress website. You can really see what the clip is and how people have played with it through the years. But it's an amazing clip. And we're going to talk about that clip in a little bit more. But again, if you want to go back and see it, it's a trip down Market Street, 1906. Now, we have a romantic notion of horses today because we don't work with them, right? When was the last time any of us, worked with a horse? It's pretty rare. They almost disappeared from the workplace, other than our Amish cousins and Mennonites who use them for their farms. But otherwise, it's recreational. But we have this romantic notion about horses now because, we don't associate with them. So we think about the American Western movie. We all know it's a Western. It's the cowboy riding into a dusty town, belling up to the saloon. There's a shootout in the street, and accompanying him always is his trusty steed, the horse, right? The guy who'd rather get himself killed than hurt his horse. Standard Western American fare. By the way, anyone under the age of 50 probably does not know who that guy is. And we should do a survey on that. And it's like you showing a young person how to use a rotary phone. Forget it. We all recognize the power of advertising. Think of the Budweiser Clydesdales. Is there anything more recognizable than those Clydesdales? And I don't know about you, but I miss the old Budweiser commercials from the Super Bowl. I wish they would bring them back. And then, of course, this scene from the city, of these lovely and truly annoying, characters that are really romantic and sweet and hold up the traffic, and you just want to run them over. I'm sorry, they are just annoying. But this is our romantic notion of what horses are like. But that is not what I'm talking about. This is the horse I'm talking about. This is the era of the Industrial Revolution. In the United States, it's from about 1880 to 1920. And I'll use 1900 as a nice convenient cutoff date, but it's really a time period. And a lot of things happen. This is when America becomes America. It's when we go from an agricultural community to urbanized environments. There's a lot of things going on that make this all happen. And the horse plays a major role. It's a revolution in technology. Iron and steel become cheap and can be used for anything. All our buildings go from being wood frames or stone, like around here, to being ironclad or steel-based skyscrapers. You can't have skyscrapers without steel. You have things like rubber and chemicals, and all the things that we take for granted came out of this time period. Communications. You could be here in St. Augustine and make a telegram or later a telephone call out to San Francisco, place an order for something, and it would be shipped here. And for us, it's also the era where public health becomes an important topic. They discovered the germ concept. The doctors had found germs. They understood what germs were. Viruses, by the way, were not until about the 1920s. And so public health doctors, this is the first time when American cities, it's true around the world, start putting in things like clean water systems, really trying getting sanitation systems working, because they understood what a health hazard all this was. And this will play directly into the horse. So the good news about this era was it truly revolutionized the country, but ultimately it all came down to transportation. What's powering those smokestacks? Where's that fuel coming from? Where are the raw materials coming from? All that kind of stuff. And then where's it all going? Now, the good news was, just like today, long distance transport was pretty cheap. Just like today, most bulk products, your agricultural products or whole, go by river. You think about the farmers out west or whatever, most of that stuff goes by river today as well. And so it was relatively cheap and inexpensive. Railroads would go where the rivers didn't. And one of Henry Flagler's railroads, of course, ran down the east side of Florida. And that was all possible because iron and steel were cheap. And you could put railroads anywhere. And that's what made all this possible. There's a revolution in transportation. But there was a problem. And the problem is the city. There's two more ingredients to make the Industrial Revolution happen. Obviously, we could spend whole classes on this, but there were two more main ingredients to make this happen. The first was people. This is the era where the cities explode in population, here in the States and in Europe as well. Why? Because they need people to work in the factories. And the cities just dramatically increase. Most of the major cities in the States double or triple in a decade. It's absolutely phenomenal. So there's a problem. The city fathers were no dumber than we are today, just as incompetent perhaps, and political, but they understood what they needed to do. They were trying to put houses in one area, manufacturing in another, transportation here. Does planning ever work for us? It didn't for them. It's the same issues. So what do when we have too much congestion? We build more roads. Does that ever solve the problem? No, let's all drive through Orlando, right? It just doesn't happen. So this is when the city exploded in population. And we think of tenements. That's when this happens. That cities had other issues before, but the populations are simply out of control. This is the era of mass immigration into the US with a lot of the same issues that we face today. So the people are part of it. The US population goes up about 75% from the Civil War to 1900. Why? Because they're feeding the factories. That's why. It's also the time, by the way, that we become the breadbasket, like California and the Great Plains go under the plow. And that requires a lot of people as well. So what is the last ingredient in all of this? It is, as you can guess, Mr. Horsey. The population of horses quintuples, absolutely quintuples in 50 years. Why? A, they're going to the farms. Again, the Great Plains and places like California. Anyone ever played Oregon Trail as a kid? This is all going under the plow. But a large number of these horses go to the cities. Why? Because everything local, transportation has to go by horse, period. When you leave here tonight and you see your cars and every car on the road and these lovely tourist trams that go through, imagine those being pulled by horses. And by the way, fun trivia for you. 1 horsepower equals how many horses? 1 horse, right? So your car has 200 horsepower. That's the equivalent of 200 horses pulling it. You know how many manpower a horse is? This is the fun one. It's 6. So they did plenty of studies back in the day. So 1 horse is equal to 6 adult males. So if you have a 200 horsepower car, that's 1,200 guys pulling your car. Equivalent. And they did all sorts of studies back then. So anyway, the horses are the only way to move things from factory to factory in these congested cities. It is the only way to get things downtown or shipped out or to the metropolitan areas or to the transportation areas. I'm a Chicagoan. I grew up in Chicagoland. This is Haymarket Square in Chicago in 1890. You see a few horses. So everything has to move by horse. And again, they tried everything. This is the era of elevated trains. Anyone been to New York or Chicago? You see L's. They tried cable cars. Anyone ever been to San Francisco? Those things didn't work, by the way. That's a tourist trap. They just didn't work at all. They tried all sorts of different ways to get things through the cities. And the only technological solution they had that was reliable was the horse. How many of you had Amazon home delivery? I am not joking. Amazon is about 120 years late. In Chicago, they had a great store long gone now called Marshall Fields. And their story was that when you went downtown to shop, you pick up the packages, they would say home delivery before you get home. There you go. Again, all by horse. That's a disciplined line of carriages, by the way. That's absolutely amazing. And so again, this happened everywhere you went. The average, by the way, was 1 horse for 20 people. Now, St. Johns County, 1900 had 10,000 people. So that's about 500 horses in the county. The math holds up pretty much wherever you go. Bigger the city, the more horses. They were used for everything. So for example, up above, we see them pulling a tram full of people. You gotta get people to the cities. They're pulling a dairy wagon and running fire engines as well. So there's 3 horses. All right, everyone do the math. How many guys would it take to pull that fire engine? 18. There we go. Can you see why they use horses? So they were used for absolutely everything. They were indispensable. And again, everyone tried finding other ways around not using horses, and they couldn't do it. Nothing was as cost effective. These horses, again, getting away from our romantic notion, these horses were for one purpose and one purpose only: work. We think of, everyone on the beautiful little horse riding through the park, kind of stuff. That happened, but horses were very expensive. Be like buying a Jaguar or a Ferrari today. They're very expensive. Only the super wealthy could afford Mr. Flagler there, could afford to have a private horse team. Otherwise, you couldn't do it. In 1900, the average worker made about $500 a year. It varied a little bit, depending on where you were and your actual job, but you're talking about $500 a year. Now, today, we say never spend more than 10% of your income on transportation. So they should be spending about $50 a year, right? Unfortunately, the horses were about $200. So you can see right away, typical person simply couldn't afford to buy a horse. You had to put gasoline in your car, you had to get oil changes, maintenance done. Same was true with our friendly critters here. It costs about $150 a year to feed them, water them, maintain them. They get sick just like you and I. Every piece of equipment on a horse has to be purchased, maintained, all that kind of fun stuff. And by the way, you can park your car for a week, right? You come back and it'll start right back up. You gotta feed a horse every day, you know, or you're gonna have serious problems. You want that horse to pull something. So a typical wagon would be about $50. So you can see the average worker could not afford to have horses. So who owned these? It was the companies, it was the manufacturing companies that were shipping things back and forth. All those horses we saw at Marshall Field, guess who owned all those horses? Marshall Field. You would have cartage companies, like trucking companies today, and that's who owned them. Or you could rent a horse, you know, Hertz, rent a horse. I just thought of that. And that's what normally you would do. So for example, if you're moving your family from one part of town to another, you might rent a team for the day, but the typical worker did not own horses. It was simply unobtainable. The horses were for work. They were born, bred, fed, and worked until they dropped dead. Period. They did not go out to pasture for a nice retirement. They were literally dropped dead in the streets. And I got a shocking photo for you in a little bit. Their lifespan was about 5 to 7 years. 5 years, you know, typical in the cities. Right? So again, you know, we don't think anything of taking our car, selling it to somebody else, and it goes down that food chain, and eventually where does it end up? The junkyard. Same thing there. But the horse, instead of going to the junkyard, goes to the street. Now, this is where it gets fun. Horses are biological, just like us. They eat, they drink, they do all the things you and I do, except watch Netflix. And what goes into a horse has to come out. And this is where, excuse the pun, the rubber hits the road in the cities. Okay? Again, about 1 horse per 20 people. In New York in 1900, there were 200,000 horses on the streets. Absolutely phenomenal. And you can drop that number down based on your population. Chicago is a third of the size, 70,000 horses. St. Johns County, roughly 500 horses in the county. So it's in the cities that this problem becomes pretty obvious. So in New York with 200,000 horses, anyone guess what's coming next? Every single day, 6 million pounds of poop and about 500,000 gallons of urine were hitting the street. Now, who do you think is obviously freaking out about this? Right? Well, everyone, right? So you look at the accounts at the time, everyone's talking about the smell, the disgust. And of course, it's the doctors, it's the public health officials. But this is where that era what happens. They are absolutely freaking out over this because they understand that this is breeding disease. Okay, and they're all looking for solutions.
Oh.
Isn't that lovely? So this is actually a shot. We're going to see, this is the before shot. We're going to see the after shot. This was not uncommon. There were, you could literally find mountains of this stuff in the cities. In London, they were predicting that the city would be buried by a 50-foot pile of manure in a generation. I mean, and again, what are they trying to do with all of this? Well, they were smart folks just like us. So up here at the top, I'm not sure what the folks on Zoom are seeing, but up here in your top left, is a manure pit. And they would have these placed all around the town, and the street sweepers would just shovel the poo into that, and at some point pick it up. And you hope pick it up. If you look carefully at this photograph, there's a door and a window right next to that pit. And that's where I would put the kids. They obviously tried sweeping the streets. They used water to clean off the streets. The problem was not technical. It was political. Just like today, there's always political shenanigans going on. And in all the cities, it was always, this alderman is controlling the cleanup in his area, and this guy over here is not. And there's always this push-pull in all the cities across America. No one got it straight. And so one community can be nice and clean. When you look at that video from Market Street, San Francisco, you'll go, huh, that's pretty clean. But if you look carefully, you'll see street sweepers, and you'll see the guy spraying the water, the hose down the street. So I'm going to introduce you to an American hero, the king of poo. This is Colonel George Waring, Civil War veteran. He was the first guy to really put all things together. He toured Europe. He wrote extensively on sanitation, how to keep the streets clean, and he came up with the obvious solution to it all. Someone has to control everything in the city so you don't have little pockets of messes all around the town. George Waring got permission in 1893 from the city of New York to have complete control over cleaning the streets. How difficult is that, right? I mean, we would go, yeah, that's pretty obvious. It was unheard of. And a lot of the politicians were really irritated. A lot of the guys who were working on the streets, weren't friends of George, and, they would quit, they would fight him. But he had a brilliant public relations idea. He dressed all the sanitations in pure white. It was a great marketing gimmick, which got me thinking, so which came first, the doctors in white lab coats or the street sweepers? I cannot find an answer to that. There's got to be something somewhere. So George Waring literally organized the New York City crews like military units, and they were all assigned areas. They would clean up the trash, they would clean up the snow, and of course, the poo and everything else on the street. And it was remarkably effective. For the first time in America, it actually worked. Remember that scene? George was smart enough to do a series of before and after shots. So he did it before, and here's the after. I mean, you could lick that ground, that clean. He was so effective. It was so brilliant. It solved all the problems that they fired him. He lasted 2 years, and again, it was this political infighting. They said, thank you very much, you're out of here. He was sent by the US government to Cuba after the Spanish-American War to clean up Havana, and he probably got yellow fever and died. And of course, yellow fever was a huge issue here in Florida as well. Well, there's another thing about horses, they're biological, and just like you and I, they meet their maker. And they were expected to die on the streets. They were not retired out to the countryside. These are workhorses, and you would work them until they fell. That's it. This is an amazing photo from New York, very famous, because obviously the first thing you do is you look at the horse and you, oh my God, can you imagine this today? This would be national news. To me, what's amazing are these kids are indifferent to the horse. They're not even looking at the horse. They're playing. There's a dairy down the street, and these other wagons are going in and out of that dairy. When you look at the photo carefully, you'll see the mounds of poo in the street. In New York alone, 20,000 horses died like this every year. And there were companies that were contracted. How good are contractors? Depends on your city and you know who's paying who, to come pick the horses up. Usually, most cities were relatively okay, because this was pretty obvious, but there are all sorts of horror stories of how long these poor guys ended up on the street. And then you have to take them off to a rendering plant. Everything is recycled. Is recycling a new idea? No. All the furniture, I think this is authentic furniture, is stuffed with horsehair. It was used for everything. So these poor critters would be taken off to rendering plants, and can you imagine being downwind of a rendering plant? I'm from Chicagoland, and we Bubbly Creek, guess where that name comes from? Still bubbles 80 years after they last used it. So something happened. That world doesn't exist anymore. And they were smart just like us. They tried finding the technological solutions around the problem. They tried looking for alternatives to horses. They couldn't find one. They tried finding ways to make the cities cleaner. Always this tussle between the politicians. This is not our streets today, right? In 1900, they had no solution. The first international urban conference was all about how to pick up poo. And they walked away saying, you don't know. You don't know how to do this. So what changed? And you know it's coming. It's the horseless carriage. We're going to see this car in action in a couple minutes. This is the 1885 Benz motor wagon. And it's normally called the first production car. They sold 25 of them. But the interesting thing here is, in this industrial revolution period, it was common for guys to be in their backyards and ladies in their backyards, in their sheds, tinkering away. This is the era of the bicycle. There's a great exhibit over, I'm not sure which building it is.
Tovar, second floor.
One more time.
Tovar, second floor.
You'll see about the bicycles in there, and what a revolution that was. So they're all tinkering with bikes. The Wright brothers, what do they work on? Bicycles. Then they went on to make airplanes. And these guys would be in their sheds and they're tinkering with bikes, they're tinkering with different kinds of wagons, and they're trying to shrink motors down. And Carl Benz was a tinkerer, and his whole thing was to try shrinking the size of a motor and put it on something. And I was at a conference last week, and we were up against a modern replica of this. And of course, all his car nerds were just really pouring over this. And we're going to see this thing in action. Now, part of the problem with the early cars is there are thousands of manufacturers. Do not believe the Wikipedia list of auto manufacturers around the world. It is a tiny fraction of what will actually happen. I asked today, do we have a manufacturer here in St. Augustine? They didn't think so, but I'll put money there was. Somebody probably made one or two little contraptions, and that was the end of it. And that's true for all the early manufacturers. So what they were manufacturing was for the wealthy. A typical car then would be somewhere, depending on what you got, between $50,000 and $500,000 in today's money. You think gas is bad now? How about $22 a gallon? Because at the time, gasoline, they knew what gas was. It was a byproduct of kerosene. You know, these lights appeared before they were electric. They were powered by kerosene. And gasoline was just a byproduct. They burned it off. So these cars were extremely expensive. You and I would not have had one of these. So remember that scene from Market Street in 1906? If you're on Zoom and you don't want to know the number, mute me at this point. How many cars did you see? 17?
Yeah, I saw about 24.
24? Any other numbers? There were 5.
Oh, no, really?
Yeah, 5 cars.
So yeah, I thought we made a car.
Yeah, of course. And you could, again, this is a really fantastic video to watch on your own time. The reason they did that is who owned cars? The wealthy. This is part of an advertising campaign that they would show in Nickelodeons. The company making these films was trying to entice you to move to that community. And there are different cities who pay for these things. You see lots of cars. What does that tell you? There's lots of wealth there. This is the land of milk and honey. Move to San Francisco. It was all an advertising gimmick. But there's only 5 cars in the whole thing. What you do notice is how many wagons there are. And these wagons, by the way, pull huge loads, 10 tons often. Another fun fact, how many of you have been in an accident? Right, just about everybody? The fatality rate with horses, I'm not making this up, was 75% higher than it is with cars today. Horses get spooked, right? So imagine these wagons pulling multi-ton loads and the horse gets spooked, he's falling right into the crowd. The fatality rates were phenomenal. So again, things don't really change, do they? So that's why you see 24 cars, and you can actually find online, you'll see people talk about, oh my God, look at the traffic. And it's the same car just going around. And I've actually had some friends trying to identify these vehicles. We can't do it. Again, it's local manufacturers. Ultimately, there were 800 car manufacturers in LA alone. Most of them making just small numbers. And that's the problem with trying to identify early cars. Often there's just no records of what this thing really is. So one of the fun problems that they had at the time was, we think of automobiles. What are we powering our cars with? Gas, now electric, right? So this first car, I'm going to mention this because in the video it comes up. This car actually has a tiny little tank, this little copper pot, and it's filled with ligroin. Ligroin is a chemical solvent. We call it naphtha here in the States. It was used for cleaning things. So for example, these curtains really got dirty back in the day. They would clean them with naphtha, ligroin, and highly flammable, which is why they used it as a fuel. So Carl Benz used ligroin because it was on hand. And you'll see that in the video. That's why I'm mentioning it. Steam, right? If I was a betting man in 1900, I would have bet on steam. Why? Everyone knew it because of the railroads. This is a 1902 locomobile. This is a sister to the first car registered in Florida. And the problem with steam is it took a lot of time to heat up. Think of putting a kettle on your stove. It takes time to heat up, often a half hour. So no quick run to Publix if you're using this. And the steam, of course, would boil off. And so the range is very short, very clean. And you can still buy steam powered cars. You can drop a steam engine in any one of your cars if you want. This is Henry Flagger's first car. It was a white steamer. Some of you may remember that Jay Leno got burned a couple of years ago. He was playing with this white steamer. Well, and I know Jay, this is exactly how he looks all the time. He's always wearing denim, all the time. I think if he went to the Oscars, he'd be wearing denim. Well, what's it take to power a steam car? Gasoline. And so you have to feed the gas, and you have to get under the car to open the valves, light the pilot light to get the gas going to heat the steamer. And that's what he was doing. There was an accident where the gas sprayed all over him and the pilot light lit it. And so he got very severely burned. So you can see a problem with steam engines right there. Electric cars. Do we think electric is new? No, they had electric cars back then as well. This is an example of one of those small manufacturers. Only 2 of these were ever made. This is a 1913 Argo electric, but I love the purple. I can't resist this photo. Talk about eye-popping. Electric was very popular. Think of your car batteries today. Drop 12 of those in your car, off you go. That's all it was lead batteries, just like today. Very efficient, very quiet. I've been in these things, you never hear them running. The problem is range, just like today. This is a great photo of a lake I know she's in Massachusetts, but if you look carefully, and I'll be happy to send these, slides if you like. She's got Massachusetts plates, 1912. And the reason we know, only Massachusetts had that style of plate in 1912. So we know it's in Massachusetts. I was at this conference last week. I had some of the top experts in America looking at this. What kind of cars are they? Well, we don't know. There's just too many options. It could have been, or hundreds of manufacturers. And in case you ever wonder what happened to all these things, it's called World War II. Scrap drives. That's where the vast majority of all the early cars went. They went into making, they were melted down for scrap metal. So I don't want anyone to get the impression that because the automobile pops on the scene, all of a sudden our horse friends go away. Think of those wagon loads, multi-ton loads that the horses are pulling. That's their job, right? That's what the workhorses. These cars were very rickety. If you've ever had the joy of working on some of these early cars, they are a nightmare. Everything breaks all the time, guaranteed. They were very expensive. And they just couldn't compete with the horse. So this didn't happen overnight at all. So what changed? Obviously, something changed. And here's, anyone know what it is? Henry Ford. It is the Model T. Henry Ford did not invent the automobile, but Henry Ford did not invent the assembly line. Henry Ford perfected it, is what he did. He had the genius to see, how do I get the car cheap enough so the average working man could afford one? A standard Model T got the price down to be the equivalent of $4,000 today. That's how cheap he made. Remember the other cars, how expensive they were? 50 to 500,000. His would be $4,000 today. Model Ts were not cheap cars. They were well engineered, but inexpensive. The materials in these cars were indestructible. They really are. There's 60,000 still on the road today. You can buy all sorts of parts. These are easy to maintain. The materials are absolutely phenomenal. You can't kill these things. And they were incredibly rugged. So it was inexpensive, unbelievably rugged, and you could modify them to your heart's content. So remember all those horses and wagons that we've seen over and over again? Here's what killed them. It was not the car version of the Model T that killed off the horses. It's the truck version that did it. Horses were meant for pulling loads, replaced now by trucks. So every truck you see on the road now, you can think Henry Ford. And so they simply upgraded a little Model T. And you could do this any way you want. There are an infinite number of ways to modify a Model T to this day, including snowmobile Model Ts.
Wow.
I lived in Minnesota for 3 years. Man, this was handy, I'm telling you. They were used for everything, including the last place where horses resided was the farm. So the Fordson tractor, it's called Ford for a reason, became cheap enough, inexpensive enough, durable enough to work. And this is just an upgraded Model T is all it is. And obviously other competitors all caught on to what Henry was doing and eventually even surpassed him. So the number of cars and trucks go from basically 10,000 in the country, 1900, to by 1920, there's 20 million cars on the road. It's absolute, and that's the end of the horse. Basically, 1920, the horse is largely gone. By 1930, they're vanished. Except for, and think about that time frame, how fast that was. Absolutely phenomenal. So we've talked about this transition from the horse to the horse period, and everyone loves the poo stories. And so I'm going to make a series of bold projections here. So that time period from 1900 to 1920 is when the revolution took place in our mobility. So what will 2044 look like? Now, the good thing about being a prophet is if you're right, boy, is he smart. If you're wrong, something else happened. So I'm gonna predict what the roads will look like in 2044. Okay? First, it's more of the same. What do we do when our roads get too congested? We build more roads. Does that ever solve the problem? No. Yeah, but that's human nature. You do what you already know. You're just gonna keep reinforcing it. It's just more of the same. Gas engines are going nowhere. Now, we all understand the issues of climate change, carbon footprint, all those kinds of things. But gas engines keep getting more and more efficient, smaller, lighter, less polluting, and there's simply nothing that competes with their durability. And they're really fantastic until they, of course, now your electronic sensors fail, then you're in trouble. But you know, when all of us were younger, what kind of engine did you want in your car? A V8. Oh, you had to have a V8. How much horsepower? Or horsepower. That was just the thing to have. Today, the V8s are gone. There's only a couple cars and trucks left using V8s. When I see Ford F-150s with 4-cylinder engines, it's like, holy moly. By the way, those turbocharged engines, they won't get you past 100,000 miles. They will fail. But anyway, gas engines are going nowhere soon, for better or worse. We will see more electric vehicles, but there's big caveats here. So the problem is not the electric motors on the wheels. The problem is the battery packs. It's the power source that is the problem. You have to drive a standard EV 80,000 miles before the carbon footprint offsets internal combustion engines. They burn, they're dangerous. And you would see the price of replacing battery packs. It's like, you know, you're sticker shock to say the least. So I do think, and I'm a big fan of hydrogen powered cars, but I don't think it's going to really happen. So I do think this is a technical problem that will get solved. By 2044, all the issues that we're dealing with right now, I think will certainly be solved. And so we'll see more EVs for sure. For right now, hybrids, like I would never buy an EV myself. A hybrid, yeah, because you're combining the best of both possible worlds. And of course, until they break, and then the maintenance cost is phenomenal, because you can't work on them anymore. I think the real revolution is going to be in the way that cars talk to each other. This is computing power. And so we're seeing this already. How many did Easy Pass? Right? I'm too cheap. I just do the paper plane. On the west side of Florida, by the way, we don't have toll roads. Just letting you know, they're coming, but we don't have them yet. That's a simple radio communication between you and the road. How many of you have lane change warning signals or backup cameras, or the cars will beep at you and then actually hit the brakes if you get too close to the car? These are simple little steps that are taking place. There's tons of work going on now. So that cars really do communicate with each other electronically, or the roads are talking to you. There are already efforts underway to build in chargers on the road as you drive over them that will charge your battery with electronic vehicles. Autonomous cars have been around for 30 years. And if you ever want to go see one, they're in places. The problem with autonomous cars where there's no driver behind the wheel really is not the autonomous car. The computing power is good enough. It's the human crashing into them. So you'll see these stories in the news where an autonomous vehicle crashed. No one did it. Someone hit it. And it's almost invariably what happens. I talked to a computer engineer for EVs. He said a standard airliner has 15,000 lines of code. Get that plane up in the air, do its thing, and come back down. Typical for a car, typical lines of code are like 1.5 million. Why? Us. We're unpredictable, right? We're trying to predict human behavior and all sorts of circumstances. Nicole and I were having lunch at the plaza today, And I'm having cardiacs watching the traffic. I cannot believe how people were driving, how these tourists were getting run over is beyond me. So that is happening. Now, in 1900, nobody, Henry Ford didn't predict it, what the transformation was going to be because of the automobile. That technology came out of left field. They knew it, and people were aware of it, but it just completely transformed their world in 20 years. So I cannot help but think that there's something out there now, unknown, that we would recognize, but will completely transform our mobility 20 years from now. I can't tell you what it is. It's unknown. But just like before, it was just a bolt out of the blue that changed their world. I cannot help but wonder what it could possibly be. Oh, by the way, has anyone noticed your insurance rates going up?
Yes.
Oh, yes, they are. And you know one of the reasons why? Remember all that electronic data they're collecting? Guess who's collecting all that? Insurance companies. Absolutely. They now know how bad a driver Shelley is. They can tell how fast she's driving, where she's driving, when you brake. And that is why they are now billing people. That's one of the reasons, is because they got the data on you. They now know. Now, since I drive about 90 on the highway, more if I can. But that is one of the reasons. And so there's good sides and bad sides to electronic communication. When you hear these ads for, it's a good neighbor policy, sign up for Good Neighbor, and, the better driver you are, the more you'll save. All they're doing is they're collecting the data. That's sort of, I guess I can't blame them. But the flip side of all this is theoretically, and I really do think it'll be true, certainly on the highways and limited on our urban roads, you won't need stoplights. You won't need stop signs. Why? The cars will know when they're there. They're already working on this kind of stuff. And so the cars will literally be able to cross each other safely. And I think by 2044, that will be a reality in many, many cases. So what I want to do now is finish up and introduce you to two amazing women of the early automobile age. In this time period, there were amazing engineers, designers, car drivers. We all heard of Artie Oldfield, right? The guy, by the way, cheated all the time. That's another story. And the stories of the women are largely forgotten, although they were playing a role right from the start. Aloha Wanderwell is one of my favorites. She is the first woman to drive around the world. She did it from 1925, took them 5 years. She started out at the age of 16. She was an amazing firecracker. She met her Ford Motor Company sponsored this endurance race. And so there's big prize money at the end. This gentleman here is Captain Walter Wanderwell. He was neither a captain nor a Walter nor a Wanderwell. That is another backstory I won't go into tonight. She ends up hooking up with his expedition. They get married and they go gallivanting around the world. This is her driving a Model T, God knows where. And she did these expeditions for 30 years. Her husband eventually, by the way, gets killed on her yacht before they go off on a South Seas cruise, and it's the oldest unsolved murder in California history. There's all sorts of great stories like this. So Aloha does this. She does this for 30 years, and she's also an amazing cinematographer. So she took photos and films that you can find on the internet. They're all preserved by the Library of Congress. And the group that does the Oscars, the Association of Motion Picture, well, they have an archives. They preserved all her films as well. She lived into the 1990s. And so I encourage you to read about Aloha. And in fact, here's her book, and I'm going to donate it to the library so you can read more about Aloha Wanderwell. As you may guess, Aloha is not her real name. But that is for the library. You can find out what her real name was. The other person I want to introduce you to is the amazing Bertha Benz. Remember, Carl Benz was the guy who built the first production automobile. They made 25 of them. He was a tinkerer. He was not interested in marketing. It was Bertha who understood the marketing potential of the car. She went on this amazing trip in 1888 that basically everyone saw this and it was world headlines. And for the first time, people heard about horseless carriages. So this video was produced by Mercedes-Benz in 2018 in honor of her 1888 trip. The story is true. She did go with her 2 kids. She was visiting her mother, of course. So she had to drive about 60 miles to visit mom, takes the car without telling her husband. And so she completes this trip. Everything in this video you'll see is true. She does break down. She does have to go get Legroin, the fuel, from the pharmacy. She fixes a fuel plug line with a hat pin, and she has to use her garter to fix a fan belt. Now they compress it all for dramatic effect, of course. And this video you can find on YouTube very easily. It's got great Easter eggs. Look for the dead guy. But this is the amazing story of Bertha Benz in 1888. Let's see if I can get this. This is 4 minutes long. Where's my little, there it is. Any of you seen this?
No.
Excellent. It's very, well, it's very dramatic.
Stay with your brother. Is the pharmacist in here? I'm looking for 10 liters of Legroin.
You won't get those stains out of that dress. Better buy a new one.
It's not for my dress. It's for my carriage.
You're trying to poison your horses.
Do you have 10 liters or not?
Unfortunately, she died during World War II, and so her death went unnoticed here in the West. We're running, so everything in that story is true. And every 2 years, there's an automobile rally to follow her route, and I'll be going on that in 2026. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm not gonna be driving a car like hers. I know we're running just a little bit over. I have another 4-minute video clip with the first car movie. Are you?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, this is really maudlin. Love story, irate father, cars exploding. What more can you ask for? So this is from 1903. This is called Runaway Match. So somebody's eloping. So one of the things I like about this, again, you can't identify these cars, so they're just so local. But watch how they get in and out of the cars. So with that, I know we're running a few minutes over. I know my father-in-law would have killed me. I don't know what he said to the father-in-law, and the dad doesn't, club him with his cane, but with that, let me finish and thank you again. Thank you to the Zoom audience. And I know we're running a little bit over, but I'll take any questions that you have.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
You said a bunch of cars were used for scrap metal during World War II. How did people replace them, or did they use horses to?
Well, there were so many by that point that we don't know how many were totally scrapped. Somewhere between 4 to 6 million cars were scrapped during the war. It was wartime constraints, and so you weren't going very far anyway.
Yes.
Most families had heavily rationed with gas. And of course, that's part of the explosion after World War II for car production.
You have a Packard?
I do not. They're fun to drive though. Yes, ma'am.
Well, this is a question of observation. I come from Connecticut, and my grandfather, well, great grandfather, had ran a store in the paper. And it was a big new newspaper article showcasing the fact that he got a new team to pull his wagon or crane. And I often wondered why that was so important. And because we're talking, and I know.
No, thank you. And expensive. And, they really took care of their horses as best they could. These people weren't mean, but they had a very different perspective for how you use them. Once they were done, they were done. Yes, sir.
My great grandfather lived a mile from here. Was a paint contractor in 1900. It started his day with, because he didn't own a horse, he was urban. He also was very low income. How did he do his job?
I assume somebody carried that paint around.
So he would hire from a
Yeah,
stable?
yeah. And so again, a lot of places you would rent the horse or the team for the day, the wagon, the horse. If you didn't have it, you rented it. You worked out some deal. I'll paint your barn if you lend me your horse for the week or something like that. All those kind of barters. But it was very, very expensive to operate these teams. It was a major investment.
Yeah, did Henry Ford ever use Spanish moss for the cushions?
Did Henry Ford use Spanish moss for the cushions on the cars? I have no idea.
He tried, but it was buggies. They say it was the first automobile recall.
Oh, really? Oh, so the first automobile recall, he used the wrong material?
Well.
Yeah, well, Henry, by the way, he was a materials guy. His engineers and his team actually perfected the assembly line and everything else. He gets the credit. Henry was a materials guy. He liked perfecting things like that, so if that product didn't work, change up the product, do something else. By the way, who uses Kingsford briquettes for grilling? Yes, who invented Kingsford briquettes? Henry Ford. It was a byproduct, so nothing went to waste. The guy who suggested it to him was Kingsford, so he got his name on it. But it's a Ford byproduct to this day, by the way.
Was there a Model A?
Yes.
Was
Yeah,
it-
so-
How different was it?
So what Ford did is he sequenced it, like a lot of these manufacturers, they had all sorts of numbering systems. But his first car was a Model A, then the second one is Model B, Model C, all the way up to the Model T. And that, they produced that until 1927. Then they're coming off a new car, and he said, is it gonna be the Model U? He didn't like the letter U. And so he said, no, let's just start the numbering sequence over. And so many of you have seen Model A's from the 1930s. That's why there were two Model A's, one from the very beginning and one after the Model T. Yeah. Model A's are fun to drive, but boy, you gotta be careful. The transmissions are really slow. Yes, sir.
What was John Wayne's real name?
Morrison, Mary Morrison, yes.
I went to every one of his schools,
Really?
elementary all the way to college,
Wow. I guess he was a great horseman.
and a football player.
Yep.
Oh.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Again, it's another observation. My husband likes storing cars, and the Connecticut Historical Society, one of their houses, had two non-operating cars. One was a 1906 curved dash Olds.
Yeah.
But he and his buddies said, oh, we know how to fix that. Of course, they don't make the parts for it anymore. So they had to be fabricated. And it probably took about a year to make it functioning again, running. And so there was a grand opening for the car. And the street was closed down on either end, so we'd go back and forth. There was a farm across the street from our house. And I'll never forget the feeling of riding in that thing. It might have gone 10 miles an hour, maybe 15 miles an hour. I felt like I was going 150.
Yep. Oh, when you get in these,
So wobbly.
when you get in these early cars, so it's about an Olds curved dash, which is, by the way, the first mass-produced car. Henry Ford did not invent it. Ransom Olds did. But when you ride in these things, oh my God, it's like your life is flashing before your eyes. The most horrifying thing I've ever done is drive a Model T. And it's because there's no safety. No safety. You saw it in that video clip, right? The seatbelts, we don't need seatbelts, although they had them right from the start. All the safety features on that car, everything you can think of, they had by 1920. Everything, absolutely everything. It was more mechanical than electrical, but they had cruise control. They had that by 1920. They had everything you can think of. You just had to pay for it. No one wanted to pay for it. But those early cars really will scare the bejesus out of you because they drive different. We are so used to these things now, but they're so much fun. Going 50 in a Model T is like doing 120 in our cars. I mean, you really feel it. And then all you say is, please God, don't let me have to brake. By the way, Bertha Benz invents the disc brake. And that trip, she realized it was failing, the brakes were failing. So she sucks leather on the brakes. She invents all that on that one trip. Did she get credit? No. Is the person who invented the windshield wiper, a lady, get credit? No. And nor did she get a penny for her invention. So again, the women were involved in this. Blacks were heavily involved in it. Unfortunately, most of them were segregated out. The guy who founds the Indy 500, the guy who built the Dixie Highway, did not allow black drivers on the race. So there was a separate segregated black racing league through the 1960s. So there's amazing stories to be had. The designers, the drivers, Aloha, and many others like her. So I encourage you to find out about some of them. That'd be a great exhibit. I don't know if she ever came before. We'll have to find out. Anything else? Well, thank you very much.